There are many sides of Joe Feld. We know what he does in the broadcast sector and has done for so long. Currently, EVP Broadcast and Content at the National Lacrosse League, well-known media executive, also a musician, also a guy who's inspiring, and all of those different things I just mentioned. We're going to learn about this and how it relates to Joe Feld as we get the whole story behind the man who has done a lot in the business and beyond. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio, on Twitter at Bryan Fenley. This is the On to Something podcast. Joel, I know I've had on a lot of your colleagues. I know you've watched a couple of these. It's an honor to have you on, and I appreciate you doing this, telling your story.
Thanks for having me. It's great to do this. I appreciate that.
One of the things that a lot of people appreciate when it comes to you is your music playing talents. You love guitar. You've been in bands. How has music been an escape for you?
You know, it's my inspiration. Frankly, when I was growing up, I always thought I'd end up in the music business as performing, and played in bands in college. But when I graduated from college, I needed to get a job, and going down the road of being a professional musician was probably not going to get me where I needed to go. So I sort of went into the real job world. But music's everything to me. Playing in my band is everything to me. It keeps me sane. You meet really great friends. Performing is a total blast. And that creative side of me is just something really, really important to me. And we have a lot of fun doing it.
What do you want people to feel when they listen to your music?
I just want them to be sort of have fun and be entertained. You know, we're a bar band. We play cover music. We play 80s and 90s rock and roll. And you know, although I think some of us hold out hope that we're not too old yet, that the tour bus will show up or the record producer will show up and say, you can put your real jobs behind and hit the road. That's clearly a fantasy. The people who come out to, you know, on an evening to watch us are there to have a good time. So it's really just about having a good time.
When you're on stage, how does your personality come out?
Different than my professional personality, I would say. Usually with some sort of wardrobe or disguise, probably a hat. I'm generally, you know, you get so comfortable. The band that I'm currently in, we've been together for probably about 7 years now. So, and we perform pretty regularly, although we didn't for a long period of time during COVID and such. We're really good friends and we're really very tight. And so I think we just sort of feed off each other and have a really good time playing together.
You have a lot of good times in playing together from a musical standpoint. Also, people enjoy working with you and have a good time together from a business perspective.
That's good to know. I'd like to know who those people are.
Joel, this is not breaking news here. This is definitely not breaking news. But you stole the thunder here, because I was going to make that interesting segue from personality in music to personality in broadcast. You sort of gave the foreshadowing that that's where we were going to go. So how do you differ in the way in which you're able to show your personality? You talked about how you do that when you're on stage and you're really in the mood and really enjoying the crowd around you and even recording. But when you're completely in the work mode of broadcast, what am I going to see from you in that version of Joe Feld that might be foreign or might not see from the guy who's out there rocking it on stage?
Well, I think the best way for me to answer that is probably the same that many of the other guests that you've had on the show have answered. You know, being on the production side of my job, and there's lots of different parts to my job, but the production side, it's very process oriented. It's, you know, very sequential. It's very planning oriented, a lot of detail. You learn at an early age in the broadcast business to think 3 or 4 or 5 steps ahead. It's a completely different side of your brain than the creative side. On the other hand, if as a producer or a director or somebody on the production side, as I'm sure a lot of their guests have told you, there's a significant amount of creativity that goes into producing, you know, top quality broadcasts. So, and I don't think you have as much of an opportunity, at least in the 21st century, to be as flamboyant as you might want to be. when you're producing television shows. It's probably different in the 70s and the 80s when television producers were given a lot more latitude to be flamboyant in the truck, and now things are probably a little bit more conservative, I guess is the way I put it. But there are some intersections for sure. But I think when you're spending a lot of time on the production side, a lot of it is about details and making sure and planning for the unexpected.
How do you handle the unexpected?
You know what? I don't know. I don't know how to really answer that, Brian. I think part of it is learned. I was very fortunate to work with, I worked at ABC in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and I had the opportunity to work with some of the most brilliant and smartest and most innovative people in the sports broadcasting industry. And they taught you, whether they knew they were teaching you or not, they taught you how to anticipate. And being a really good television producer, one of the most important skills that we learned was how to anticipate, and what will you do if this happens, or what will you do if that happens. And there's a huge range of what might happen, from what the next play could be to what happens if you get knocked off the air. So you really do learn from your colleagues. And it's probably somewhat instinctive, and not everybody could be a doctor or a scientist. It's not suited for everybody.
Well, you're pretty close to having a PhD in broadcast, if there was a such thing,
Hardly, but
knowing what you've done. Joe Feld is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. So you use the word anticipation, and from a macro level, from your whole career, not just per se within a singular broadcast, what have you not anticipated when you got into the business and has happened?
You know what? I was very fortunate that I got hired by ABC right out of school. I was 22, 23, maybe. I had absolutely no idea what I was getting myself into. I mean, I really didn't have any. I don't think you have any idea what you're getting yourself into. I know that from working with the people that I work with now, there are, training programs, and there's internships, and there are ways to sort of work your way into a full-time position by spending time with production people, programming, or whatever it is. I got the job right out of school. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, what I was expected to do. I was sent to, I believe it was the Kentucky Derby for my first show, and I was expected to be Jim McKay's stage manager. And all I could do was hold on tight and hope that it wasn't my first show, wouldn't be my last show.
So when you go back to processing that first show, I guess, how did you feel going in? And then what were you told about your performance afterwards?
That's a really great question. In the 70s, you weren't told anything beforehand, and you weren't told anything afterwards. Nobody helped you. Nobody guided you. In fact, depending on who it was, some people tried to sabotage you, and you had to sort of work around that. It was really more about, it's like being a rookie and you were getting hazed, so to speak, not in a physical sense, but really more in a mental sense. Afterwards, I would say, back in those days, you didn't get a performance review. It wasn't like your producer sat down with you afterwards and said, here are the things you did well, and here are the things that you didn't do well. You generally got yelled at most of the time. And if you didn't get fired, you were doing a pretty good job. and that sounds like an exaggeration, but not really. It was really sort of the truth.
So when you don't have, and clearly, I think what you described, in a way, there's a lot of that today, where you're doing a good job when you don't hear anything, and to an extent, and that that you're not doing a great job that you hear something, because if you're doing a good job, there's nothing to talk about. But when you are kind of going through the beginning stages of your life, and look, we all at those ages, for sure, we want to be told that we're doing a good job. We want the validation. It gives us fuel and it pushes us further. But when so many describe, like you just did right there, what it's like, and not getting that. What was your industry compass? How did you find that when there wasn't a whole lot that there was to be a direction for you? How were you able to sort of navigate and take out this big old Rand McNally map and find a way?
It's a really, really great question. And I know that looking through the prism of 2022, it seems outrageous or ridiculous that you would be able to find that compass by not getting any positive or any feedback for that matter. But that's just the way it was, Brian. It's just, there's no other way to explain it. Of course, when you're working at a network like ABC Sports, which was at that time only one of 3 broadcast networks that was producing live sports. So it was a very small and select group of professionals between the people who worked at ABC, NBC, and CBS. That was the whole industry. There was no ESPN. There was only, maybe there were 40 people who worked for ABC Sports. And I'm going to guess there were a similar number that worked for CBS and NBC. So the entire industry was populated with, on the production side, not the engineering side, but the production side, by 100 people, which is pretty extraordinary. You're producing or being the opportunity to go to some of the greatest places, to do some of the greatest shows, have an amazing amount of fun. And you're just going from show to show, having a really, really great time doing something that you realize is, wow, this is really cool. This is what I want to do with the rest of my life, or at least for the next portion of my life. Like, who wouldn't want to do the Kentucky Derby or the World Series or the Tour de France or college football or Monday Night Football or the Professional Bowlers Tour? It's just like you just go from one event to the next and work with some really, really good people who are they are, I'm very fortunate that all of the people that I've met through the years, we're all still a family. In fact, I just went to an ABC Sports reunion 2 weeks ago and saw people that I hadn't seen in 20 years. And there's a connection there. That's the fuel that kept you going, doing the shows and meeting people, like being on a team. And it was really fun. And you just keep doing it until someone taps you on the shoulder and says, you're done.
When do you find yourself around people? Maybe that would be the best instance of you being an extrovert, because I get this feeling, Joel, that sometimes you're an introvert, which I am at times. So when do you find most comfortable? And perhaps it's around those colleagues that you've accrued so many years of experience doing broadcasts with, but when are you most comfortable around people and where you're most able to be that extrovert that you certainly have shown you are?
Yeah, well, only around people that you really feel comfortable with. I mean, it's just, there are some people who will talk to anybody, and they're super friendly, and they have no problem just sharing their life story and being really inquisitive about the person who they're talking to and what's in their, what's their life story. I find that to be very intimidating. So it's really more, I do. And I think it's really great, by the way. I think it's a fabulous quality. But that's not me. And so I think people who tend to be more introverted, you become more comfortable with people who you can sort of relate to and bond with. It takes a little time.
What is your best quality?
Wow, I think my best quality is great question. I didn't know you were going to ask me something so difficult or so challenging.
Oh,
I would, I would like to think it would be, I would like to think it's paying it forward with people in my industry. I was given an enormous opportunity, a tremendous opportunity at ABC. And there were some people who I worked with who gave me, the time, the space, their time to teach me and help me. And I just think as we go through the business, it's still a small business, not quite as small as it was in the 70s, but I think we have an obligation to help others who are either looking for work because they're young and help give them some guidance, or As you know, there's more than enough people who are certainly my age and maybe a little bit younger who find themselves in transition between jobs, who still want to work and still have something of value to do. And, it's really important to pay it forward.
How fulfilling is that when you get to see that happen in front of your face and know that there are a lot of people out there, Joel, who, when you think about he or she getting their careers off the ground, it was because of you. And so you just taking that knowledge and just sitting on that, maybe in a moment of reflection. And I'm not sure how often, given how fast paced this business is, that those who work in it have time for deep reflection. But when you talk about your sense of self and that identity, how much of it is tied to knowing, going off what you were saying, but then to see it happen in real time where you're able to change people's lives and make things happen for them, and then to see them not only take the reins, but then explode and just their careers grow and grow from there.
That sounds really heavy. It may be true. But yeah, like listen, it's very satisfying. I mean, you want to see people succeed and be successful in what they do. It's not unlike, if you're having a bad day and you have time for like one moment of kindness by letting somebody cross the street before you run them over in the crosswalk, or let the car in front of you make a left turn before you, or wave them across, and that gives you a little bit of an extra energy that, you're doing something small for somebody else, albeit it's very small. I think that's very satisfying. And it's not about keeping score. It's just really about watching others be successful. And that's of course it's satisfying, but I don't keep score. That's not part of the gig, if you will. And, when you're in a position like mine, I'm sure you've talked to others where you're responsible for cultivating and finding and being a hiring manager and being responsible for their careers. You can't help but do that with a sense that regardless of whether you're going to be working with that person for 3 months, 3 years, or 10 years, they're likely going to go on. Hopefully, if they're talented and successful and you've managed them appropriately, they're going to go on to bigger and better things. And that's fabulous.
What are the benefits of not keeping score?
I think keeping score is keeping score is a trap. I think that it's not the right, I don't think it's the right headset or the right place to be. You keep score, you're like, if I keep a little pad on my paper, on a little, piece of paper on my pad that says, well, I helped this person and they won't respond to my email. And I think that's just it's not worth it. It's not productive. It's not helpful. You don't hold any grudges. It's not, keeping score, I think, it's counterproductive.
I know one place you do keep score, and that is knowing the number of Emmys you have. How many are we up to? Is it 15? Did I read that correctly?
Something like that, yeah.
So you've got a couple.
It's all because of my work at ABC. There is no, you don't win an Emmy, no matter, I don't care what anybody tells you. You don't win an Emmy by yourself. You only win an Emmy because you are lucky enough to have worked with a team of people who have also won the same award at the same time as you have. And, I was very fortunate to be involved in a whole bunch of Olympics. And as you probably know, there's, I don't know, hundreds of people who work on the Olympics. So, I think you just have to be really fortunate to work with, be given the opportunity to even have the opportunity to be considered for something like that.
What was different?
But I'll tell you one other, when a number of years ago, we had some workmen come over to the house to do, I don't know, they were painting something or so, and they saw a couple of the Emmys, and they asked my wife if I was a professional bowler. They thought they were.
Well, you did work in bowling, correct?
I did. I was the production assistant and the producer of the Professional Bowlers Tour for a number of years with Chris Schenkel and Bo Burton. And let me tell you, people make fun of bowling, but it was a total blast.
What was the most fun part about that?
the most fun part about that was, first of all, it was an overnight setup. We couldn't get into the lanes until midnight. And so you set up you were up all night setting up the facility, setting up the lanes for the live broadcast the next day. So there was, when you're 25, when you're young, that's a lot of fun. I would say the crowds and the people and the bowlers, they were different than the athletes who play baseball and football and the more professional sports. They were, they showed up in their Winnebagos or their vans. They were, regular people, and it was fun to hang out with them.
So there's a difference between the athlete that is the bowler and, say, another athlete in another sport. What about the difference in your reaction? And Joel Feld is with me on Bryan Fenley Onto Something podcast. The difference in your reaction between the 15th Emmy you won and the first one.
The first one I gave to my mother. You have to give your first Emmy to your parents. Wow. The other ones, the first one was really special. I was 25, I guess. And so, Bryan, it's sort of like a blur back then. It's just sort of a blur. Listen, I'd be dishonest if I told you that you don't appreciate them all. And it's nice to be recognized, but it's like you don't keep score. It's not about the Emmys. It's really about the work. And, all these years later, I am still inspired by the people I work with and the work that I do, and solving problems and trying to be creative and working in a completely different sort of environment, if you will, or with a different set of guidelines than we did back in the 70s and the 80s, where, probably have heard this before, money was no object. You just, you had a lot more free reign. You could be a lot more experimental, but you also can be really experimental these days, just in different kinds of ways. And so my enthusiasm comes from the fact that I really love what I do. And I think that that's very fortunate.
What do you think is the cause of the blur you were talking about? Is it just because it was a little ways back? But when you say it's a blur, why do you say that?
Well, I think when you're doing 45 shows a year, I don't know how it can't be a blur. You're just really going from one to the next. And when I say a blur, I don't mean a blur in a bad way. It's just, it's just, you go, what did I do? How did I do that? What was I thinking? But again, you're 20, you're very young. I had never traveled any place. I certainly hadn't gone to Europe or Asia or any of the, or the Soviet Union or any of those places. I don't think I had a passport when I got the job. I think I'd been on a plane once or twice to visit my grandmother in Florida. So all of a sudden you're going to the airport and you're living with 3 or 4 other guys, because none of us are home at the same time anyway. And we really can't afford our own apartments in New York. And I think I was making $13,000 a year. But it's a blur because you're just going from show to show. You get assigned to, I don't know, make it up. You're assigned to college football. You're doing a game every single week for whatever that is, 15 or 16 weeks. And maybe you're doing another show in between college football. And then you're getting sent to Europe for a show. And then you're going here, then you're going there. So how could it not be a blur? Well, you go back. I wish I would have saved a lot more memorabilia than I did. But we did a lot of shows. I don't know. It's a blur, a good blur.
A blur, and it's been a fun ride. And
oh yeah,
being in the business has opened the doors to, like you just mentioned, seeing the world and all these other positives that come from it that maybe when you dive into it, you didn't think was going to happen. And being able to just have an understanding of how different societies around the world operate, and having sports events there, and just learning and growing and just seeing how it all comes together. And it's hard to, go for it.
No, I'm going to say, I just love the storytelling part of it. And, not to be overlooked, talking about my experience at ABC, was that Rune hired some of the best talent in the history of the industry, and the opportunity to work with that level of talent, whether it was Frank Gifford or Al Michaels or Howard Cosell or Chris Schenkel, Bud Palmer. I mean, I could list, probably 15 more. They were among the best in the industry. And so how could you not benefit from that professionally when you're growing up? And when you have to produce Jim McKay, you better make sure you have your act together, because he he was a great guy, but you're not gonna fool him by not being prepared.
In being around great talent, as you mentioned in some of those names, it allows you to know even now, and as your career has gone on, to know what good talent is and to discover it, to find it, and then to cultivate it. And that's been part of what you've done and what you've done so well. And Joel, this has been such a fun conversation. I absolutely love
Thank you.
this. And as we sort of wrap this up, Joel Feld with me, I'm Bryan Fenley. I just got to say that it's special to hear the way in which you are so open to talking about your story, because what I love about these conversations is that you use the word inspirational. There's so many people out there that just listening to your journey are going to grow and learn and figure out stuff on their own based upon your experiences and you sharing them. So it's really special. Have to laud you for that. And I certainly appreciate I think it was like 3 or 4 secretaries I had to get through to get you on the books because of how busy you are.
That's not true. That's totally untrue. I am calling you out on that. That is just totally untrue. You know my cell phone number. No, that's totally, I don't have a secretary. I do everything myself.
You do it. Yes.
I make all my own reservations.
You are a self-made man and you've done a lot of good and will continue to in the biz. Joel Feld, I'm Bryan Fenley. Joel, thanks so much for doing this. This was a blast.
Thanks for having me, Bryan. Appreciate it.